When we look back on movements in history, why do some people appear to be more dedicated or committed? Why is it that some people stay woke, while others appear to change direction, give up, compromise, break down, or sell out? Why couldn't they make that change that they claim to want so bad? Were they fronting? Was it just a phase? Was it all for show? And if not that, then what happened to them? What makes a conscious person do unconscious things? Do you know what makes this happen? What makes this really happen? Well, oftentimes, neither do they. But a clue to this mystery lies within how our brains work and how you and I are going to free our mind. Your brain unchained. Your thoughts, your habits, your stress, anxiety, your memories, knowledge, they're all here. So let's explore what this thing is and how it works right quick. First off, the brain is made up of billions of brain cells called neurons. These are like pathways or streets in which electrical signals are sent. These signals travel from one cell to the next using chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. Now our brains are working all of the time. And whether you're studying or sleeping or even acting a fool, these neurons are sending signals across their trillions of potential pathways. So the brain is made of neurons, and as we move or do whatever we're doing, talking, remembering, they're firing. Scientists are able to view the firing of these neurons in order to understand a pathway in which we may be thinking, certain areas that can be mapped as storing certain information. Take a look at it. We can see neural pathways lighting up as someone is carrying out an action or having a certain thought. And just as we do or think things repeatedly in life, so does our brain start to form certain patterns of how signals are sent and the chemical or neural transmitter released for each of our thoughts or actions. So it's within these links, this connection, this chain of cells, that all of your thoughts and actions in this world first occur. Now, I'm not really here to provide you with the details of the brain structure, but there are many different parts of the brain, and scientists have created maps to correlate with where information may be stored in each of these areas. And as we just saw, patterns of activity in these areas has been observed as a basis for understanding how our brain works. Now I'm going to take us from talking about the structure of the brain to the function of the brain so that we can better understand what it has to do with us staying woke as people. As people. All right, here we go. As a people, the human brain is distinct in that it has a particularly large area, at least for our proportions. This area is called the cerebral cortex, and it's the reason for what is seen as our uniquely high-level thinking, memory, and communication. Now, these three areas, thinking, communication, and memory, are like on the starting lineup for what makes us woke. So here's what we know about each of them. Let's look at communication. Now, pay very close attention. This will be interactive. Now, communication, that's where we exchange information verbally or non-verbally. Ideas, feelings, knowledge, experiences. And since our ability to communicate is at its core an expression of our interconnectivity, it's also a pillar of us practicing consciousness. And human beings are particularly unique in the variety of symbols we use to communicate these ideas. But also, there are ways that we communicate, which may not be directly seen as intentional, yet somehow we understand it. But hang on to that thought. As people practicing consciousness or trying to stay woke, we're interested in clear communication. We want to be effective. After all, we know it's effective communication that pushes forward the progress of history. Humans learn information from each other. With that in mind, research has shown that the rhythms of brainwaves between two people taking part in a conversation begin to match each other. And it's very real that this experience that we share creates a connection between our brains, something called synchrony. So what are brainwaves? Brainwaves are like electric patterns or rhythms that can be detected over the brain. And depending on the frequency or speed of the rhythm, among other things, it shows us the level of focus a person may have. So there's certain brainwaves we see in sleep or dreaming, and there's certain brainwaves that we see in someone like you watching a video right now. In fact, a very interesting study done by NYU was performed in the classroom in which humans were wearing EEG headsets. It's shown that human brain waves tend to synchronize within groups of interactive people. And while students' brain waves were more in sync with each other, they were more engaged in the class. and also reported having a better learning experience. So again, this as evidence of our interconnectivity shows us that through syncing brainwaves, collaboration and mutual growth became more achievable. Keep paying attention. This is also happening as we learn through observing the world. Now last week, I brought up something about mirror neurons. When you saw me do that, a part of your brain actually registered yourself doing it. The neurons that fired in my brain as I caught the marker weren't the only neurons to fire. Your mirror neurons fired, almost as if it was you catching the marker. Therefore, your experience of what I did affected and shaped your brain, which would mean we're actually wired to see ourselves in each other. When you do something, a part of me processes myself doing it. And when something's done to someone else and was experienced by someone else, a part of me sees that happening to me. And this most likely is the basis of why and how we empathize with each other. Similarly, the experience of someone who may have had an amputation on their body often involves something that's called a phantom limb. It's like a mental residue of the body part that they lost. Sometimes it involves a feeling of pain or tingling. However, when one is feeling pain, merely seeing someone massage that limb on themselves can create a level of ease to the experience of the person with the amputation. This is believed to be within the space of how mirror neurons are also operating. We're going to stop right here. Now here's the interactive part. I want you to write down as much as you can remember from this video so far. You can hit pause and just make a list. Let's keep going. Now these mirror neurons were discovered when a group of researchers noticed that there were neurons that would fire both when a monkey grabbed an object and when it saw another monkey grab the same object. They were later found in humans, and this system helps us learn a lot of things by imitation. More than 2 decades before, an experiment known as the Bobo doll experiment found that kids who watched an adult behaving aggressively with an inflatable clown, the Bobo doll, were more likely to beat up the doll themselves. And this effect was stronger when the adult was of the same sex as the child, which suggested that the kids were more likely to imitate people that they identified with. And by contrast, those who watched an adult play peacefully tended to do the same thing themselves. Since then, there have been numerous studies that have shown that viewing violent TV shows is linked to more aggressive behavior. And a researcher at the University of Missouri notes that the U.S. Army has developed a first-person shooter game to get its recruits used to blood and violence in the virtual environment before they confront it in real life. But violence is not the only thing that we mirror of each other. So our communication happens beyond just what we say or what we intend to convey to someone. In fact, that old saying, do as I say, not as I do, in terms of how the brain works, is virtually impossible. We as people are too interconnected for that. So here's what we know about thinking. Still paying attention? Now thinking, of course, is when ideas, images, mental representations, or hypotheticals are being observed or manipulated in our minds. It's covert, meaning no one knows we're doing it when we do it. And it's symbolic. So it's not the actual thing, but it's some image we've created in our mind. And through thinking, human beings have essentially created all of what human history is. The inventions, the societies, the systems, the activities, the art, the people, products of human thought are what we live with. So when we talk about thinking and being woke, we're usually talking about doing this type of process consciously. That's to say responsibly and rationally thinking about the world. Now, there are some processes I really think we got to talk about as conscious people. Whenever our brains are introduced to something that is pleasurable, there's a release of a certain chemical messenger or neurotransmitter called dopamine. Now focus. All experiences that feel good to us release some level of dopamine, and this drives us to register and desire the experience again. And this process is not just in the human species. A study in the 1950s by Bowles and Milner showed that a rat, by hitting a lever, was able to send electrical stimulation to certain regions of the brain that were so rewarding of an experience that the rat would hit the lever and self-stimulate to the point of fainting or exhaustion or even starvation. Similar studies were also done with rats where drugs were administered. And in both cases, the chemical stimulation experienced in the brain caused the rat to continue to seek the experience. They would even brave through painful or dangerous conditions to achieve access to pressing the lever again. In the region of the brain it appears to be most stimulated is the reward system, which triggers the release of dopamine. And it was later shown that humans behaved the same way when the brain's reward system was stimulated by electrical shock. And as this occurs over an extended period of time, the specific neurotransmitter that allows us to feel satiated or satisfied goes down. So our pursuit of this experience becomes compulsive. And we see it with food, sex, drugs, alcohol, gambling, social media, anything that people tend to get addicted to. Now, this is how our thinking is affected chemically within addiction. And you may know that in humans experiencing addiction, they're able to reflect with some level of self-awareness that they don't want to do the drug. But their brains seem to rebel against even this conscious desire to their own detriment. Our brains are hardwired to seek reward. So addiction, in whatever form it comes, takes over rational thinking. But here's a really interesting area that neurons come into play with how we think. The interesting thing is this: even when watching this video, other pathways are lighting up, parts that you're not necessarily using or conscious of. And each of these paths may be an alternative interpretation of what you're perceiving. You may look at me and see me as a bowl of jello, and you're not even thinking about this. Maybe you're looking at me and thinking about bubblegum for some reason. Maybe because of the B in my name, Baye. But you know I'm not bubblegum. But yet, for some strange reason, that part is also being registered in your mind. We're going to call this unconscious processing. It's an alternative version, perception, or even personality that's not really being used. And your mind does this without you even thinking about it. It's like it's running through a list of things that could possibly be perceived or associated and landing on what it decides is the reality. And at times we may be aware of some of these thoughts, which when focused on could distract and make it hard for you to pay attention. But with most thoughts, most of the time we're hardly aware of them at all. And we can't be. It's within our unconsciousness. But what we call a healthy brain is one that lands on a rational conclusion of what it is it's perceiving, and thereby expresses itself in a healthy way that aligns itself with its own survival. Thinking rationally, paying attention, staying woke. Whew. So what's happening here? It's like there's a misalignment or a blind spot within our characters, motives, feelings, and desires. What makes a conscious person doing an unconscious thing? We claim to want something, but then our chemically vulnerable brains get in the way. Well, yeah, in a nutshell, this is the challenge of the brain. It's an amazing computer, but it can be hacked. Now, our prompt this week was to think of a moment of being your best self. And I'm willing to bet that for most of us, those times that we felt like our best self also felt like times we could take responsibility for it. So we were in control of that version of ourselves. Somewhere you may feel like, I did that. Now, this entire conversation about the awarenesses of our brain is for us to assume the responsibility of showing the world the version of you that you can feel proud of. Because we don't always feel proud of ourselves, and there are times that we probably don't want to remember how we acted. Which takes us to the song from this week, Ivory Coast. The story of a young lady moving from a violent street life experience to a more health-conscious lifestyle, but still within a dysfunctional relationship. Her own awareness of what was not the best representation of herself is what moved her from one plateau of life to the next, removing one chain from her brain and then finding another one that had to go. Take them chains off her. She don't want them chains on her. And in a way, this is a story of many of us, as we recognize that there's a certain track or way that our minds are working that warrant us going a different way to a totally different destination. So in effect, breaking that chain that's holding us back. And of course, symbolically, Ivory Coast representing the idea of a home for an enslaved individual. Metaphor. So as conscious people, we recognize that whatever we expose ourselves to, conversations, circles, vibes, images, activities, they serve to form a chain within our brains. So the question is there a way that makes it harder for us to be hacked, to truly see our character, desires, feelings, and motives, Well, a psychologist named Dr. Richard J. Davidson studied the brain activity and brain waves of Buddhist monks who have been training for many years in the tradition of meditation. And one thing that he saw is a very patterned way in which the brain's neurons would fire, as opposed to the more chaotic brain waves of those who did not study any deep meditation or concentration. Brains of the monks actually demonstrated more sustained lengths of what's called gamma waves. A very simplified way of thinking about this is a heightened level of focus or concentration that's absent of any sense of fear or anxiety. Clear, conclusive, confident, optimistic, absolute, affirmative, convinced. To be effective in our wokeness, we must create a practice or rhythm in our own life that increases our positive state. And the good news is that we have access to this rhythm. It's all around us. In fact, we are it. Seems like I forgot something. Thinking, communication. Oh yeah, memory. The prerequisite to move on. Save the paper that you wrote down as much as you can remember. Then I want you to watch it again. But save that paper. And if you can, say it out loud like you're giving a recap of everything you just learned. And then I want you to go to sleep. Like a full night's sleep. Don't worry about it. It's going to make sense later on. And later we're going to pick up talking about memory. I'm Uncle Baye. Onward and upward.